like that, we return. This is episode number 127 of the Cozy Corner of Cinema, being recorded on this Labor Day, Monday, September 2nd, 2024. The time is 4:09 p.m., and outside we have been graced with such a warm and lovely and beautiful day. The sun is out. It has painted the roads, the sidewalks, the grasses, and there's a beautiful breeze in the air. I was watching a film earlier today. I was actually taking notes for the next episode of Peephole Pictures, which will be recorded very soon. And I just felt that breeze come right on through the open window, right to me as I'm sitting on my chair. And I'm going, my gosh, man, what a wonderful, wonderful time to be alive. It is the days like these that we cherish, and we must hold close to ourselves and must not let them slip casually, because when the days get too hot or too cold and it becomes egregiously hot or cold, we think back to days like these and we often go, I wish that there were more days like these. And when they're actually here, we must cherish them and use them however we may see fit. Going for a walk, reading outside, sitting inside with the window open. It's just wonderful, man. I look out back on the deck and I see the cat, stretched out, lying in the sun, enjoying his own life. And it's such a beautiful sight to behold. And it's one of these days that just really kind of puts things into perspective and makes you so happy to be alive, and really kind of makes you cherish the little moments like these. It's just absolutely wonderful, man. It makes you almost emotional to think about it. But it also was a perfect time to get plenty of work done. Plenty of writing and watching and reading to be accomplished. There's no shortage of any of the above. We just keep picking away at it like an ice pick and just kind of chisel at it the way we can and get the job done in the way that we see fit. And funnily enough, right as I have started recording, I have now realized that the book I had intended to talk about is on the other side of the room. And I have two options, which is to pause the episode or just grab it and see if I can project my voice loud enough so there is no break in the conversation. And I think I'm going to go with the latter. So here I am standing up. I'm walking over here. Here I am on the other side of the room. I'm going to grab this book. Got the book in my hand. I'm coming right back. Don't you fret. Don't you fret at all, man. Because we're going to talk about this book, which I want to talk about. And I was going to wait to talk about this until I finished it, but I'm just about finished. I think I probably have about another, probably less than 50 pages or so. But I figured, what the hell, why not talk about it now so we can move on to other topics next time. And I wanted to briefly talk about the wonderful new book by Jared Stearns. What's the copyright on this? I think it's 2024. Yep. First published by Head Press in 2024, Oxford, United Kingdom. And this is the book Pure: The Sexual Revolutions of Marilyn Chambers. Distributed by Head Press, copyright 2024. And is a biography into the life and times of Marilyn Chambers, famous pornographic actress, whatever. In most famously Behind the Green Door, would go on to be in a few other X-rated films, would achieve some mainstream success in David Cronenberg's horror shocker Rabid from, is that 77 that came out? I don't know. It sounds right. Yes, that is. 1977. A wonderful film. One of David Cronenberg's strongest films in his filmography. Sorry about that. I just replied to a text. And it's funny because the book examines, like I said, the life and times of Marilyn Chambers. Her early days, going into work with the Mitchell brothers, the big success of Behind the Green Door being one of the primary films of the porno chic era, not just the golden age of porn, but the porno chic era with certain films that would achieve that sort of success. And then her life after her tumultuous relationship with manager and boyfriend Chuck Traynor, the complications of being an adult film actress and trying to break into the mainstream, her troubled relationship with Chuck Trainer, who was manipulative and abusive. And it's a wonderful, wonderful book. It's one of the strongest books I've read this year so far. Jared Stearns clearly has quite an affinity for Marilyn Chambers. He talks about sort of a lot of the issues that not just she faced, but a lot of other adult actresses and even actors, both of them equally faced in the industry of either trying to break into the mainstream or the idea that they were not quote-unquote legitimate performers. They were just, in porno films. And it's very interesting to see the evolution of Marilyn Chambers' career, and sort of where, from my own kind of opinion reading this, where there are some issues of her going wrong into not being able to achieve that mainstream success, as well as what Jared Stearns points out, as well as in relation to Linda Lovelace. There are quite a number of mentions of her in the book, of course, with Chuck Trainer being such a vital part of Linda Lovelace's story, and their relationship there, and how that would eventually transmute into the Marilyn Chambers relationship. And he makes a good point where, when Linda Lovelace is trying to sell her autobiography, she's not going to go by her real name, Linda Borman, because that's not the name that was on marquees for Deep Throat. You're going to go with Linda Lovelace. And it's a double-edged sword. On one hand, you understand why you would want to use that name, because it's going to associate you with the pornographic film, with that sort of life. But then Linda Borman, at the same time, is more honest, is more of who that person really was. And Marilyn Chambers, of course, the same way, when she was going on and using the name Marilyn Chambers instead of her original name, which I am blanking on what her last name was. I'm not going to try to even find it in the book right now, but perhaps I can find it on the internet as I am talking, so there is no break in the conversation. But ultimately, when you have that kind of association with a name like Marilyn Chambers, it's going to connect you with Behind the Green Door, The Resurrection of Eve, and her name was Marilyn Briggs, of course. And she was a beautiful actress, man. She was absolutely gorgeous. She has a very Hollywood look to her, where she looks like a girl next door, but she aged very beautifully. You can look at later photos of her, and she's just gorgeous, man, and the work that she's done. The book does have a loving kind of look to her, but also is able to kind of expose her some of her faults and some of her kind of personal issues that she had, especially in relation to Chuck Trainer. She passed away in 2009, and I'm not quite done with the book yet. Like I said, I have about 50 more pages to go or so, but it looks at her and her theater work, her doing these kind of nude plays, and I think in part of that, why she probably wasn't able to achieve as much mainstream success is sort of going back onto, these sort of erotic kind of performances, and then, of course, returning to adult films, X-rated films and all that. And, it's obviously hypocritical to kind of have that distinction between a legitimate and an illegitimate actor or actress. But at the same time, when reading this, you can kind of see sort of maybe some of the faults that would have prevented her from achieving a mainstream sort of success. There was an interesting anecdote in the book talking about sort of when she went to audition for the film Going South, and Jack Nicholson was apparently very inappropriate towards her, and somebody else who I think it was Art Garfunkel, who was also very inappropriate to her, and you don't blame her. And actually, funnily enough, she auditioned for Paul Schrader's film Hardcore, but was rejected because she didn't seem enough like a stereotypical sort of adult film, porn star, which is kind of funny to speak. She's in perhaps the biggest of that time, outside of Deep Throat, in terms of achieving that sort of mainstream sort of success, interestingly enough. But it's a very, very well-written book. I'm very eager to read the rest of it. And right now, I did buy this from Melosine, and it is sold out on there, but I imagine they're probably able to buy it from Head Press's website if they have one, or Amazon as well, who I've noticed that there were some books that were sold out on Melosine's website that were available on Amazon to purchase. I do want to read Fred Halstead's book that I don't know who wrote, but Fred Halstead was such an interesting guy that I would love to read his work, and I'm such a fan of his films. So that'll be read in due time. But Pure, The Sexual Revolutions of Marilyn Chambers is one to read. Not even if you're just a fan of her work, of her as an actress, or of the industry. If you are just a fan of really well made, really well kind of developed stories about these kind of actresses from an era who were trying to break into the mainstream, it is worth reading nonetheless. Also, some great photos in here as well. Some photo shoots throughout the years of her for the poster for like Insatiable and some magazine covers. And it's all great to kind of read them and refer back to the photo section. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. But good stuff. Good stuff nonetheless. So that is right there. Put it right over to the side. So yes, it's we're now into September of the year, and it's great because now we're into the fall kind of weather. We're getting into some, Halloween's coming up. A lot of horror films, a lot of scary kind of films are in the public conscious, are in the mindset. People are going to be recommending you films, and it's going to be great to write those down and turn other people on to films and get a beautiful kind of fall mentality of writing, of just getting your work accomplished, of getting all your artistic endeavors fully worked on and put together. It's just a wonderful, wonderful time of the year. I love this weather. I love going outside, driving with windows down. It's just great, and it's also great to kind of get into the mentality of just being creative, man. Just putting everything together, working on whatever it is you got to work on, and there's no shortage of work to be done. I was recently talking about. I'm always talking about one of the greats, Michelangelo Antonioni, and just his breviary of just incredible films. He had a hell of a run in the 1960s, and then his later work, later compared to that time before his, let me pull this up here, into his much later work of the 80s into the 90s, but his work from the 60s into the 70s. Now, I haven't seen really, I don't think any of his 50s work. I'm looking at his films here of Story of a Love Affair, The Lady Without Camellias, The Vanquished, Love in the City, The Girlfriends, Il Grido, Sign of the Gladiator, I guess does not count. But then you have to start out in 1960 with La Ventura, and then his streak is just insane. He has La Ventura, Let Not, Let Clease. I have not seen The Flower and the Violence, but then he did Red Desert. I've not seen The Three Faces, both of which The Three Faces and The Flower and the Violence are both segments in a bigger part of the film. And then Blow Up, and then all of those on their own. Those are all wonderful, wonderful, great films. And he had a 3-film run with, I don't know what studio it was. I want to read here. And oh, good Lord, choking on my food. Let's see here. I want to pull this up here. Bear with me for just a moment so I don't have to pause. But this was the last of his 3-film run that he did for producer Carlo Ponti from MGM, because he did Blow Up in 1966, Zabriskie Point in 1970, and then he finished it up with The Passenger from 1975, starring Jack Nicholson and Maria Schneider. And of the three, I would say it's not as good as Blow Up, but it is much better than Zabriskie Point. And I do like Zabriskie Point, but it's not the most subtle of Antonioni's work. It's a very well-shot film. It's a beautiful film, but it's one that I have not really had much interest to revisit. The Passenger, on the other hand, I find to be an exceptional work. It has a lot of the elements of maybe some of the later post-Red Desert, or Red Desert and on kind of features of Antonioni's work. You have a lot of just really great elongated sequences of silence. You have the whole first 5 to 10 minutes of the film, we have Jack Nicholson and you're just watching the film really unaware of the context of what is even going on. He's just kind of going around. He's in the desert. He's hitching a ride with these people, and it's sort of like, you're sitting there going like, what is going on? And the complications that arise when he starts to travel around with Maria Schneider, a wonderful actress in her own right. Has been in many great films. Last Tango in Paris, of course, talked about on the show recently, and their questionable relationship, so much so they don't even, she's just girl. She doesn't even have a name in the film. Jack Nicholson plays the character of Locke, and it's a film that I can see why it may frustrate some, because it's an Antonioni film that is as much about the characters as any of his great work, but I get the vibe of it being far more ambiguous than something like Lenat or Leclise, which is more dialogue heavy. This has these just long sequences where you're just with these characters that can be off-putting to somebody who may not, one, already be familiar with Antonioni's work, or two, may not be prepared for what they are going to watch. Because as this is going along, the plot ends up becoming a bigger part in the second half of the film. But because I was so engaged with the film itself, that it really was not a concern of me of any kind of narrative structure. I don't really need that in a film. I am more content with just being with these characters and seeing what path they may lead from here on out. Because the film as well was shot by Luciano Tovoli. He was the DP on this film, and he has actually quite an interesting resume as is. He was the cinematographer on some other films, including some bigger films, of course. He would do like Titus in 1999. He worked with Argento a handful of times. He did Argento's Dracula. He did Tenebrae. I think actually maybe that was just the two that he did. He also shot Suspiria, of course. He did This Sunday Woman, and he is a wonderful cinematographer. He's able to capture these very gorgeous kind of open landscapes, open desert exteriors. And the film doesn't take place the entire time there, but when it is, especially that final shot with the cars kind of driving away, it almost like makes the hairs on your arm stand, man. It's absolutely gorgeous. Antonioni is such a wonderful filmmaker in that the more that I see of his work, the more engaged I am with not just the films themselves, but the context in which watch them one after another. So I think having seen Zabriskie Point first, having this idea of him moving into another era of his filmmaking, this film does complement that. And I am very interested to see his work after the fact, which I have not seen. He would follow this up in 1980 with Mystery of Oberwald. He did Identification of a Woman in 1982. He did some shorts, some music videos, returning in 1985 with Beyond the Clouds, and that was his last feature. His last segment in a film was Arrows from 2004, before he passed away in 2007. But he's one of my favorite filmmakers. The Passenger was a film that I had been wanting to see for quite some time, and it was truly wonderful to finally watch it. I think this is one of the strongest films in his already impressive filmography, and it was great to truly just finally watch. I really do love this film. And speaking of great filmmakers, let's talk on the other end of somebody who does not quite have the extensive filmography, but is a wonderful filmmaker in his own right. Let's talk about Shane Carruth and his film Upstream Color from 2013. Now, I did buy this double Blu-ray from Arrow UK, which includes his 2004 directorial debut Primer, which is just a brilliant film in its own right. It's often put into this category of, you talk about the most confusing films, and that is true, of course. It's a very heady film to watch and sort of get at, but when you're able to kind of break it down, it becomes a bit more manageable. But Shane Carruth is such a fascinating filmmaker in his own right. He is somebody who I get the idea of as if he was making films in a different time, how I think he may have had more leniency. Because I was curious, because Shane Carruth has had, I don't know a lot about it, so I'm not even going to speak really on it, because I think it'd be deeply inappropriate for me to make any sort of opinion without having the full facts. But he had two feature films, Primer in 2004 and Upstream Color in 2013. So that's a nearly decade-long gap. and there was accusations in his personal life, specifically with his former girlfriend Amy Seimetz, who would become a director in her own right, making the film. I think it's called She Dies Tomorrow, which I haven't seen yet, but I'm very curious about. But I know I read a few things online about him. Apparently, he had turned down offers from David Fincher to do he had another film planned after Upstream Color, but then he got in trouble with some accusations. So when I say that he's a filmmaker who may have been able to get away with some more stuff at a different point, but now of course it's a different kind of era, so a lot of that stuff, especially with the internet and all of this, maybe doesn't fly as much. But you can't really fault him. I don't know really enough about it. I did some light reading, but I didn't really delve too much into it because I'm really just here to kind of talk about the films more so about anyone behind it. But Upstream Color is such a fascinating and wonderful film. It's truly a film that just, like Primer, just gets better and better after every viewing. And I don't mean strictly from just an understanding of the narrative where you go, okay, I'm able to kind of understand it more, I'm able to kind of get a better grasp on it. But when you have the previous knowledge of you knowing what you're watching, when you know you're going to get a seemingly non-linear story, you're able to kind of appreciate the film more. Because the first part of this film, I got a sip of this water here, I apologize. But you're really kind of thrown into it. You don't really know what's going on. We have this, nope, there's me dropping things again, good lord. We have this character, Chris, played by Amy Seimetz, and at first we don't know what's happening. She's seemingly kidnapped by this other character, played by Shane Carruth. And he has her under a hypnosis. He's manipulating her. He's talking about this water, which is the greatest thing that she can have until she can't have it anymore. He's talking about her transferring a bunch of money over to him, and your watch is at first. And the film doesn't even open with this. It opens up with something completely different. You have these two kids under their own kind of hypnosis, and you have this idea of this disease from pigs that perhaps might have an effect on them. But we get that first part, the closest to a narrative. You know, she's remembering certain lines, like she's going to go to a bank and say this, and if there's an issue, she's going to say this, and she has all these kind of backup plans. And then at a certain point, when she's no longer under the spell of this hypnosis, she is able to grasp some sort of reality. She's questioning herself. She's like, "Why didn't I didn't transfer all this money? I don't remember doing any of this. They're talking about, well, you signed off here, you came to the bank here. We have this footage of you and stuff." And this character played by Shane Carruth is still kind of trailing her, is still kind of involved with her. And from there, kind of the film takes a life of its own, of this complicated relationship between these two people, and also this outside force with these pigs and how that is influencing them. And it's a brilliant film, man. This is now the third or fourth time I've seen this film, and it is just a incredible film. I think not even just the fact this is dealing with sort of headier, non-linear topics, but I think when you have a film like this that is going for, on the surface level, yeah, it is confusing, and the first time you watch it, it can be even frustrating to go, like, where is this film going? But on an enjoyable level, where you're just following these different sequences and trying to piece them together yourself, it makes for such a unique experience that by the end, even if you have answers and you're not completely fulfilled from a narrative standpoint, not that it matters, but if you're looking for that, you're still engaged enough to want to revisit it. Not solely to try to understand it more, but because you're just like, wow, that was such a ride of a film. And especially seeing somebody like Shane Carruth, who does so much with so little. I mean, Primer itself, I think, was something small, like $5,000 or something like that, but he's able to make, ironically, the most interesting and unique science fiction film in I think a very long time. In that film as well, I think it's more well known, but it is about these two characters who accidentally discover they've built a time machine and the problems that come with it. So, of course, in any kind of time travel film, you have the problems of, what kind of logic is the film going to go by? Is it going to go by its own logic, or the grandfather theory, or any of the sort? And the film does its own unique spin. And I remember I had a really wonderful experience the first time I watched this film, because I used to meet up with some acquaintances. We'd have a film night every week where we all had films we wanted to watch. We'd throw them in a hat, and then we pick one out, and then go from there. We hadn't seen it, and this was one that was such a great experience watching together. We all were talking about our own theories and ideas after, and then we put on a YouTube video that was like a 20-minute video, kind of explaining. I don't want to say explaining because it's definitive, but an explanation to whoever uploaded the video in terms of what was going on after a certain point and certain points to connect it to. And these films, I think, have more longevity, not solely because you're going to be thinking about it and trying to understand it, but in terms of they're going for much headier sort of topics and ideas. And that's why I think part of the reason why I champion a film like Tenet is not just because I'm already a fan of Christopher Nolan. I mean, that's not to say I don't like all of his films. He has a couple that I'm not crazy about. But Tenet as well, to me, I think is one of the most interesting films in the past decade. Or even, in terms of a mainstream kind of success, it came out at the worst time possible when people weren't properly able to experience it theatrically the way it needed to be seen. I was lucky enough to have seen it twice theatrically, once in IMAX. But it's a film that is going for a much greater idea, and whether or not you like or dislike the film is your prerogative. But to dismiss a film of that type, I think is, I don't want to say shallow in a way where it's shallow in a way where if you don't like it, but I say shallow in a way where a film like that is trying for something more, and I find whether or not it works or fails is much, much more interesting and much more to pry from than just another generic superhero kind of nonsense Hollywood spectacle film. Another sequel in a franchise that's been beaten to death, or just some nonsense, man. That's like fast food. It's disposable. You watch it, you crap it out, and then that's it. There's no substantial value, and that's not to say there's anything wrong with those films. I'm not saying that Tenet isn't a better film because it's going for a weightier idea. But when I see just some of the stuff being released in a wide mainstream sort of 3,000 theaters level, that has no longevity besides shallow, like I liked it, I didn't like it, it had good action, it had good scares, then it is a little like, man, it's kind of a shame when you see something like Tenet that doesn't totally work on a mainstream level, because it is going for these weightier ideas that may not appeal to everybody. But people have their own opinions on it. People can go, they can find more value in a superhero film or a franchise film, and that's totally fine. I'm not saying that those films are better or worse. It's all subjective. There's no objectivity in art. I've said it before and I'll say it again, but it is just saying that a film like Tenet, like Primer, these films that are asking for a bit more of the audience than just a surface level sort of, gunfights or jump scare or, trauma horror movie of the week. It's you got to kind of champion these films and really kind of bring them to the public and talk about them in conversation and discuss the ideas of just, oh, you didn't like that film, well, let's discuss about it. Or, oh, you like that film, let's discuss it, These kind of films sort of bring more out into the general kind of conscious and end up being more so films that I find can last far longer and have far more longevity than whatever flavor of the week kind of Hollywood spectacle product is. But they all serve their purpose. There's no right or wrong in that. It's all, we all have our own experiences we get out of these films. And I can only speak from my own experience, which is why I get something far more out of like Tenet, but then somebody else could watch it and go like, I got nothing out of it. The ideas don't work. They don't do this. And that's totally fine. That makes for good conversation. That's why you got to cancel out all the noise online of people going like, oh, this is the worst film I've ever seen in my life. It's like, man, is Tenet the worst film you've ever seen in your life? I mean, give me a break, man. Is it the best film you've ever seen in your life? It's like, man, there's such insane reactionary opinions. There are movies out right now I have no intention of ever seeing. Actually, there are movies out right now. I saw a film recently a mainstream big Hollywood 3,000 theater film that I watched, and I'm like, this is terrible. This is just noise. There's nothing to gain from this. Is it the worst movie ever? No, I just didn't like it, man. I have acquaintances who go, oh, I thought this one was great. I thought I had a good time with it. I'm like, that's great. I'm glad you like it, because that's what makes the conversation good. But is it the worst movie ever? Of course not. It didn't work for me. Who cares, man? It's just nonsense, man. So forget about all that internet crap, all that internet nonsense, all this reactionary sort of, the best film I've ever seen. This film's getting hyped. This is the best film of the last decade. It's like, forget about all that. Watch it with your own opinion. Don't believe the hype, positive or negative. If a film gets 100%, it's not the best film ever. If a film gets 0%, it's not the worst film ever. You have to form your own opinion and not bleed into the social conscience, man. Enjoy yourself and enjoy your life and enjoy these films, enjoy your art, and bounce ideas off people who are actually going to attribute something to the conversation and to your life instead of just like, oh, that was good, that was bad. It's like, all right, well, that's disposable then, you know? But with that said, I'm going to be wrapping up here. It's getting a little cloudy out. Would love for some rain, but, you know, we'll see what happens. But hey, you guys have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day whenever you're listening to this, or night. If you're at work, that's great. Work hard. If you're at home, that's great. You know, enjoy yourself. This life is just so beautiful to live, and we cannot waste even a moment of it. So enjoy yourselves. Have a wonderful time, and I will be back next time. So thank you so much for listening.